So coming back again to the current example, which is the financial meltdown. You see, a lot of arguments, as I was discussing with somebody earlier today, that a lot of arguments have taken place about, whether it was intended or whether it was not intended. But by default, one of the key ingredients in this financial meltdown is human greed on one side and deregulation on the other side. Deregulation, in layman terms, implying lack of accountability. And on the other side, where you have extreme sort of unethical attitude, like the Madoff, the Ponzi schemes, you cannot even explain it in terms of well-intentioned or well-intended or that it was going to help anybody. Meaning that was just purely an unethical act that went on for a long time under the disguise of financial advancements and so on. So it's a very complex structure, but at the same time, it's not as complex as it is because it alludes to some of the basic human flaws. It alludes to some basic human flaws, such as greed, such as lack of accountability or not wanting to be accountable, and the lack of vision, the long-term vision, meaning the myopia that we have all developed in our times, where we cease to look, at least in the market world especially, 3 or 5 years beyond. We seldom even look 15 years beyond. If we are very attached to our kids, we might look a generation beyond. But we do not look 100 years beyond our lifetime or 200 years beyond our lifetime. And the sorry state of things is that if our predecessors thought that way, then probably we won't be here. Or we will be in a very much miserable state of the world today. So again, some of the basic premises of where ethics is. And ethics does not always have to do with religious affiliations or religious background. Meaning, if you look at it, these days, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for example, has become a very fierce advocate of something called secular ethics. And secular ethics implying that human beings or human species, regardless of any religious affiliation, are capable of being ethical, are capable of taking responsibility, being accountable for their actions in the long term. But it is always the kind of worldview that we live in that would or would not support a certain ethical system. For example, I'll give you an incident. When I was growing up in India, it was mostly farmers who lived there, although I come from a political family, a bureaucratic family. But my parents always made sure that I stayed close to village and saw what 70% of India was doing, meaning agriculture. And one day I was just wandering on the street and I saw this 87, 88-year-old gentleman planting some mango trees along the street. So I struck a conversation with him and I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, just planting some mango trees. Then I asked him, well, how long would it be before the tree grows and starts bearing fruit? And he looks at me and he says, well, you have to be patient. It'll take about 6, 7 years or 8 years or even 10 years. But of course, I had an agenda in that conversation. So I looked at him and I said, now, Grandpa, how old are you? He said, I am 88. And I said, well, do you think you'll be around in 10 years' time to enjoy the fruits of your labor? And this completely illiterate individual, completely illiterate, who had never actually left the village, looked at me, gave me a big smile, and said, no, but you'll be around to enjoy its fruits. At that time, that story, that incident, that encounter, didn't make that much sense to me. It was just a conversation, a good-hearted conversation. But now that I look back, a simple, illiterate, uneducated individual with that much vision, to be able to plan things that he's not going to enjoy foods perhaps during his lifetime, but the future generation is. And it is not even in his fields, it's on the side of the street, so anybody could enjoy the fruits of his labor. And as we move away from those kinds of agriculture or agrarian models, we are becoming more and more preoccupied with what we are getting out of this life and what we are doing in order to fulfill our own needs in this life. And as I said, if we are attached to our kids, we might look at one more generation, but not beyond that. And this, I believe, is a big dilemma that we as a society are facing. And surprisingly, though, things are changing quite a bit. When I arrived at MIT almost 8 or 9 years ago, I encountered some very motivated young engineers who, of course, came with a vision to change the world with tools that they had, technology, so to speak. And one interesting example was when I was sitting in a room with them trying to design certain projects for Sri Lanka. At that time, we were working on developing the tsunami safer houses just in the aftermath of tsunami. And it hit me, and so I asked them, well, why are you interested in this? And they said, well, we want to help people. And I said, well, why do you want to help people? Buddhists, we like to, split hair, I said, as far as questioning is concerned. So I wanted to understand, like some of my colleagues in Zurich who are trying to, who developed this new field called neuroeconomics, trying to understand the neuroscience behind altruistic behavior or neuroscience behind generous behavior. So I started to, ask them a lot of questions and said, well, what is it that is motivating you? Is it your religious background? No, almost 90% of them were atheists in the room. I said, is it your parents that encouraged you? No, our parents didn't help a single individual in their lives. It's a miracle that they are even agreeing to pay for our tuition. And 70% of them didn't have any support from their parents. So I'm trying to look at models and say, well, what is it that is really motivating you? And they said, you see, we just look around. We just look around and see that there's so much misery in the world and we are privileged and that we can do something about it. See? Original insight in some manner. Very original insight, because they are not being taught by their parents or they are not being told by their ministers or spiritual advisors they need to be good or they need to do good. You see? It's very insightful, very original, and moreover, you see, it is not distracting them from their studies or anything. You see. They simply want to utilize whatever it is that they're studying for benefiting humanity. So that kind of original insight needs, again, some kind of support to make it sustainable. And that is what I think we are lacking a lot. Meaning we have academic departments that teach ethics. We have a lot of ethical conversations. We have a lot of ethical debates. We have people waving flags when it comes to pro-choice and abortion issues and all. But we don't have role models. We don't have role models where the young generation can look up and say, this is the individual that I can learn something from. We don't have life role models. All the role models that we have are individuals from 200 or 300 years ago, you see? Or even 50 years ago or 60 years ago. You see? Very few living role models. So then I look at the state of our society and I say, oh, it's sheer poverty. Not poverty that people don't have enough to eat, but poverty that people don't have enough to look up to. See? And that's poverty of the first world countries, first world. See? Great educational institutions, great research is going on, but not enough role models that can define or that can encourage people to become good human beings. Great engineers, great scientists, great doctors, but good human beings. And that is the agenda, I think, that I wish to put in front of you, that I wish to present to you, is that what we as a society can do about promoting this kind of ethical learning, because we are social beings.